All right, well, let's get things rolling here. On the front end, thank you very much for attending our webinar, Mastering Inventory today. A few housekeeping items before we get started. We will send out a link and contact info at the conclusion of the presentation, probably tomorrow. If you have any questions throughout, there is a Q&A box that you can fill out. We will answer them either in line or at the conclusion of the presentation. And then finally, we will have some assets, the presentation that we are from today, as well as some company assets if you're interested, particularly in any of the elements that you see here. Would love, as we kind of get started here, if you want to throw your location into the chat, just so we know where everybody's coming from, that would be great. And without further ado, we'll kind of get rolling here. So this is the agenda today. We're going to do some quick intros, and then we're going to go over, in our experience, the three pillars of a successful inventory strategy. First, we're going to talk a little bit about forecasting methodologies, and then a little bit about the financing of your inventory, which is a very expensive asset, and managing cash within that process. And then finally, why it's so important to accurately track inventory at all times. And so without further ado, I'm going to let the other participants in today's webinar briefly introduce themselves, starting with Kenny at Pilot.
Great, thanks a lot, Jeff. Hi, everyone. My name is Kenny. I'm a fractional CFO at Pilot, which is the largest bookkeeping, tax, and CFO services provider in the United States. We service over 1,700 customers nationwide, and our bread and butter is really the ability to combine the benefits of technology and automation with the service aspect of having people layered around the front. And with that, you kind of get the best of both worlds of having the efficiency of technology, but then the personal touch of a person being able to service your account. My specialty is in the consumer and retail space, so most of my clients are really, focused on inventory, ordering, the timing of payments, trying to maximize their cash flow, and I help them a lot with forecasting, modeling, and really building out different scenarios to figure out kind of what the best mix of all those decisions could be. And with that, I'll turn it to the next person.
Thanks, Kenny. I'm David, VP of Sales with Kickfurther. We provide an inventory financing solution for consumer goods brands. The uniqueness of our solution is that we offer financing based on consignment, where we're actually helping a business purchase their new inventory, regardless of whether they have a PO or accounts receivable, but based on the dollar amount that they need to pay their manufacturers. And then once they produce and sell that inventory, the proceeds from the sales of that specific inventory are used to repay the deal and sort of repeat as necessary, freeing up cash for whatever else you need to grow your business. So we've been in business for 10 years now. I've been with the company for 6 years, worked with thousands of brands, and would love to tell you guys a little bit more about our experience and what we've learned from businesses as they go down this path, from adding new retailers and new SKUs, and managing all that growth.
Great, thank you. I'm Jeff Ellis, the COO at Wherefour. I've been the CFO and COO for a number of different inventory-based businesses, so I'll try to share some of that experience today. You can read what Wherefour does up there, but basically an ERP that focuses primarily on companies that need to manage their inventory, product costing, and have compliance requirements. And our main goal in life is to help companies get off of spreadsheets for manual tasks that can be done much better in a system. So I'm going to go through a couple industry statistics here that are interesting, kind of heading into the holiday season. The last few years, there's been a huge focus on supply chain disruptions through the whole global pandemic and afterwards. The good news is it sounds like those things are getting under control, and attached to that, we're seeing less of kind of the supply chain rushes and early ordering and trying to secure inventory buys up front. The good news about that is it does enable folks to plan in a more organized fashion rather than having to order things months and months in advance and then getting overloaded on inventory and tying up cash in advance. The other interesting statistic that we kind of came across when we were researching this webinar is, we're dealing with a lot of our clients are in seasonal businesses, and that's pretty, common across most industries where 20 to 40% of their business comes during the holiday season. Looking ahead to this holiday season, we are seeing most forecasts show kind of a more return to historical growth rates rather than the huge spikes again that we saw over the last few years. So the good news is we're not looking at a downturn, and we are looking at a nice moderate growth here for the holiday season. And so, when we're planning for this upcoming holiday season, we're definitely encouraging folks to, plan for some growth. And every business, some businesses are experiencing an explosive growth. So this is obviously kind of an industry average, but is it kind of interesting information to look at as we're looking ahead here 6 months into the holiday season. So I'm going to kick it over to Kenny now to run through a little mini case study of a real life client with name change that we're going to use to talk about some of the issues that might come up as folks are trying to manage inventory.
Can we actually go back to the previous slide? I had a comment that I think might be a good topic for us to jump into for a moment. The one before that. So I know there were supply chain disruptions that cause a change in behavior in buying a lot of inventory early. And while the supply chain disruptions have sort of settled down, I think buying behavior has changed more long term, because as costs went up, they sort of stayed up. Maybe they came down a little bit, but costs are still up, both in terms of cost of goods for inventory and also cost of logistics. So I think the way that behavior has changed, or I've noticed, is people are still buying in larger quantities earlier to get quantity discounts from their suppliers and to be able to fill entire containers or get, logistics discounts rather than having lots of shipments through the air. They do one shipment through the sea, and they have it, it takes longer to produce. So I do think that, maybe people are not concerned about some sort of economic one-time event happening and buying for that reason, but the behavior has changed kind of long-term from, the impacts that we saw a couple of years ago.
To add on that too, when you think about the way people were ordering during COVID, it was basically trying to get any kind of product you could in your hands to the consumer. So you had to do some mixed shipment. I saw a lot of behavior regarding mixed shipments, air and sea, batching up orders, trying to put some of them in existing containers because the costs were sky high. But now, because you notice especially for a lot of brands lately, customer acquisition costs are up really high. A lot of brands are trying to do the best they can to really save costs in areas that they can control now. And with logistics and shipping being an area that is a little bit more predictable, that's a big area that I'm starting to see now, where people are trying to do larger orders, try to figure out kind of how to optimize their cash flow there, really figure out the right kind of timing so that way it's not in pieces, and then really get that unit per cost down.
Yep,
That's great.
we're seeing
Thanks,
the same
guys.
thing.
Yeah. All right.
And sorry, just one question on comment on the previous slide. This growth, I think everybody was a little bit surprised to see this continue to go up, but it has continued to go up, and probably most of the people here are participating in this webinar because they're actually outpacing the growth of the economy. So even as this is rising 2.5 to 3.5% forecasted for 2024, many people are here because they're reaching a capacity on either the inventory management or the financing piece, or accounting is exceeding their capacities just without a service provider to help them, and that could be because they're onboarding a new retailer that's giving them a massive opportunity and sort of complicating the whole process. But in any case, we're here to discuss how those individual situations can be addressed with solutions that our other customers are employing. So anybody that has questions or wants to bring a particular case to the table for discussion, we welcome that.
Great, thanks.
Okay, so let's go through a hypothetical brand in which ordering inventory is a particularly stressful process. And so here we have what we'll just anonymously name Mountain Co. It's a seasonal mountain gear business. Mostly does its sales during the winter period, so it's quite lumpy in terms of timing. Now they have great success up to this point and continue to grow every year. And this is their biggest season yet. And they're expecting $11 million in revenue by the end of this winter. Now, before, orders were small, and they had equity dollars and founder cash to buy inventory to really make up for prior years. But now these orders are going to get really large, and it's just too much for what the existing cash in the bank has to make a purchase all in one lump sum. It's been a scrappy team, and they mainly use spreadsheets to manage their inventory so far, and it's worked up to this point, but it's starting to get a little bit overwhelming. They're starting to not account for inventory correctly. They have a lot of returns. It's starting to become a little bit overbearing. Now, companies like this, they typically come to me for CFO services, searching for guidance on building that financial infrastructure. Now, when it comes to managing the finances around inventory, it really comes down to three components. First part really is forecasting. So right from the beginning, you're going to want to know how much you're expecting to need and how much cash is going to really be that lump sum that you need to really pay out for to fulfill that need down the line. Second part is then financing. So now that you know how much you need to buy, you also need to figure out how you're going to pay for it and the different strategies of which you can kind of allocate that. And then last part is management. Now you have the inventory come over to your side. You need to know how to organize and maximize that profitability on that inventory when it actually arrives. So that way you can really make the most out of that season.
Yeah, Kenny, on the financing side, I've always been interested in the timing of cash flows. You're obviously outlaying cash many, many months in advance from when you're receiving it. Is there any sort of typical ground rules that you put? I know probably different businesses are different, but is it, a 6-month lag, or how typically, how far is that cash lag from the time you're sending it out to the time you might be getting it back against orders?
Yeah, it can vary quite a bit. That's a great point, because when you have certain companies where you are manufacturing something that's a little bit more time intensive, it can go as long I've seen people have to order as far out as 8 months before they can really start selling. As short and it can be as short as 2 to 3 months, especially if it's something that's something that you can also airship. So there's a number of different tactics here, right? And that, I mean, all this has huge cash implications. If you're buying something 8 months ahead of time and you have to do a 50% deposit, then that cash is basically tied up the entire period of time. Not just for the 8 months though. It's actually to the point of which you sell that inventory, which could be even 3 to 4 months or further down the line. And then also payment terms on the, potentially the retailer. So, at worst case scenario, you can be looking as long as a year. So, that's why it's really important to look through these three pillars, because there's a lot of opportunities to really cut down those periods of time in each of those segments. And usually the first place I usually recommend clients to look at is the manufacturer themselves, to see if there's some kind of negotiation process that they can do to kind of cut down or break up the payment structure.
Yeah, Kirsty, a lot of folks on here, if they're not doing business with places like Walmart and Costco, what kind of payment terms are those types of giants typically demanding?
Yeah, so those can be on a case by case basis, but you can typically see those payment terms go out from probably like 30 to 120 days, and likely at the same time there will also be a lot of deductions associated with them. So whether it's discounts, returns, or whatever extra charges they may have in the program, which then also emphasizes the importance of you being able to also track inventory on your side and having a systematic approach to it. So that way you can also keep them accountable, because we also end up seeing a lot on the retailer end is them accounting for things and then you realizing too late down the line that they might have not actually accounted for it correctly.
Kenny, are you running into a lot of people who are getting into retail and are transitioning from, purely serving a direct to consumer customer base and then planning their inventory and their purchasing for multiple channels that produce and sell at a different rate?
Definitely. Now you're really starting to see the multi-channel approach, largely because direct-to-consumer acquisition costs are still starting to rise, and a lot of brands are now trying to look for alternative ways to monetize their products, also trying to increase that lifetime value and thinking about the occasions in which their customers are really going to place their purchase. But the implication on that is pretty huge because now you have a lot of extra resources you need to allocate towards the retail channel itself, because managing that can be quite a bit. At the same time, because of those payment terms that we were talking about earlier, that also creates another cash issue where you need to figure out how are you going to be able to finance, the retailer side of things, because you're now extending the cash timeline there. Whereas in direct to consumer, once you send it, and if you're selling on Shopify, the payment term is probably only a few days between when Stripe sends that payment back to you. So that's an extra layer which you have to kind of figure out. And at the same time, being able to manage the inventory between all this is now a wholly different problem, because now you're shipping stuff between the manufacturer to a warehouse, to potentially the retailer's place of business. And now you may see yourself managing multiple warehouses between different locations, and it can get a little bit tricky.
Awesome, thanks. I have one more question on that. As somebody is moving from from just direct to consumer to multi-channel, obviously you have bigger margins when you're selling direct to consumer, but you're spending more to acquire the customer. And I know that everybody has a unique answer to this, but is there a common theme to how much they end up making in that transition as opposed to just the direct to consumer? Like are the margins becoming thinner because they're selling for a lower price to the retailer, or are they generally going up because they're spending less money to acquire the customer?
Yeah, great question. Retail is really an economy of scale game. If you look at it from a per unit basis on low volumes, direct to consumer tends to win. But when you start really scaling that to tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of units, that's where the favor really switches then into retail, because yes, you do have to pay, what you're really getting is a wholesale price, not the retail price, which is what you're charging in direct to consumer. But the ability to scale on unit cost, shipping and handling, and marketing and acquisition costs is kind of where it really shines. And for acquisition costs, every unit that you're buying through direct to consumer, ad spend climbs. It doesn't go down when you're trying to do the marketing there. So it kind of goes in the opposite effect. Shipping and handling, instead of looking at shipping every single unit, now you can do giant orders and ship bulk into the retailer. So now you're saving on that area as well. And so when you really look at it from kind of like a long-term vision of building more when you try and buy larger quantities of inventory, trying to make things a lot more streamlined and efficient, then retail is kind of where it really wins out in the long run.
Cool.
Right, thank you.
Awesome. So when you don't have those three pillars that we just looked at in place, it really does start to jeopardize your business. And I'd love to have the other three kind of contribute in here as well. But if you don't forecast correctly, you can over order. If you don't finance correctly, you can run out of cash before you even start selling. And if you don't manage correctly, you can start leaving money on the table. And so on the first step, usually when I start dealing with clients at the start of this buying cycle, I always try to work with them on the forecast first to get an understanding of kind of the lay of the land and how they deal with everything down the line. So it's a fundamental starting point to understand how much they should be buying. And there's four ways to forecast typically. The first one is bottoms up, and it's a tactical on the ground approach on building up the forecast using kind of real world assumptions that you already have. It usually provides the best visibility. An example would be looking at the number of stores that you're in, it's the number of units that you're selling there, and then trying to really build up store by store as to how many units you're expecting to sell and how much inventory you're going to need. Top down is really better for, I would say, an opaque situation where you're not too sure of kind of what's going on the ground floor, but you really need, you're starting with kind of a market size or some general larger number, and then really being able to whittle down based on what you think the slice of the pie you're able to really capture. And then there's historical analysis, which is likely the most reliable if you have a preceding period that's indicative of the future. So say, for Mountain Co, if they're looking at last season being like a smaller version, slightly smaller version, but very comparable in behavior to this coming season, then you can basically use that as a precedent for understanding, okay, how are each of the months going to behave, plus a certain growth rate. And then lastly, there's peer benchmarking, which is really helpful if you have competitor data, but essentially you're using performance that you have available of your peers and then being able to extrapolate the performance that you'll likely achieve as well, minus a few, adjustments here and there. But it's a good reference point for you to then understand kind of what you might be, how your inventory behavior might be going as well. And so once we use those methods and once the client knows what to buy and how much, it then turns to how they're going to pay for it. And that's on the next slide.
Great. Thanks, Kenny. So here we're going to talk about, the different indications that the brand could benefit from funding. And we touched on a couple of them already, but basically like moving into new sales channels, expanding from direct to consumer to multi-channel, or the other direction, or adding Amazon. I mean, you could, introduce a new product that starts selling really well. You could hire an agency that, first of all, you're spending on advertising, or you could be, running your own advertising, but a cost that generates an opportunity for selling more inventory. All of these are, going to put strain on your cash flow. And then when that inventory hits, like if you, enter into a new retailer relationship, maybe they'll place a test order first. That's common. You'll get an order that you can manage. But what's next, if that works out well, is a big order. And when that big order comes, you want to be able to say yes. And that's, sort of leads to the next topic, which is what is the cost of not having enough capital? The cost is saying no. And if a big retailer knocks on your door, they're probably not going to knock again if you say no. Unfortunately, that's just the way it works. They want to know that they're buying from a reliable supplier, and a reliable supplier has the ability to produce the inventory that they ask for on the date that they put on their PO. So it's good to secure financing and have your options figured out before that moment in time. So understanding what's available to you now, and then using, resources like Kenny and other experts to help you understand how the growth of your business, and probably focusing on the financial health of your business, will lead to increases in access to capital and also decreases in cost of capital. Because I know, from our standpoint, we evaluate risk, and risk directly correlates with the amount that you have access to and how much you pay for it. And on a broader scale, there's a bunch of different options to finance your business. And one piece of it is inventory funding. That's what Kickfurther does. But there are many other pieces. And I think, if I were running a business, I would have a capital stack, which is sort of takes two components into consideration, which are the access to the capital and, that it's accessible at the right times, and also the cost. So how much you have access to, when you have access to it, when you have to pay it back, those are really important components. And then how much it costs, obviously. But those aren't, they're kind of, you have to weigh them in a way that is specific to your business, as opposed to just like one compared to the other. So a couple options are, I like to start with bank financing, line of credit, loan, because that's kind of what everybody's after, is to go to a local bank or a big bank and get a small business loan. Those are going to be the lowest cost, more than likely, unless you have friends or family, but also the hardest to access and going to be the most stringent in terms of limits. So pretty much every one of our customers has a bank line, but they come to us because it's not enough. So whether you need more at certain times of the year, like in the case of Mountain Co, where they're buying in the summer and fall for their winter selling season, you're going to need to have solutions in place ready to make those purchases. Otherwise, you could miss your entire selling season and then your business is in real trouble. Another option is VC money or raising equity. I would say good or bad, that has sort of this sexy appeal to it. And sometimes it's a really good move. I would say that really it's a good move when the investor is a strategic partner who has connections that help you grow your business, whether that's in supply chain, improving your costs or improving your product, or in networking to help you find new customers. But that money, if you believe in your business, and I'm sure that you do, will become very expensive when they buy 10 or 20% of your business for a low price, and then you're worth a lot more money. So just be careful with taking on those investments and then realizing how much you actually paid for them down the road. Another option is revenue finance or MCA. These are common solutions that are very easy to access. Also, deceivingly, they appear to be inexpensive because you'll hear something like, oh, it's only 6% and we take 17% of your daily revenues out of your account. When you calculate the effective rates on something like that, it is probably the most expensive capital you have access to, but it's so easy to click one button after you link your data and have access to that money. So just be careful with that. It is a solution. It's a good one for specific time and place, but it can be quite expensive. And then there's inventory funding, which is what we do, which is tying access to capital specifically to the need to purchase inventory. So when you're placing order with your raw materials suppliers or finished goods suppliers, and you need to pay $100,000 for 10,000 units, whatever the case may be, that order, instead of coming out of your bank account, can come from a financing solution like Kickfurther, where we pay the entire order. And then we watch that inventory go all the way to your warehouse and then to your customer. And like Kenny mentioned earlier, sometimes to a retailer that operates on 30, 60, 90-day terms. And whenever that cash comes back into the business, that's what you use to pay it back. So every single deal is customized based on that duration, whether it's 30 days, 90 days, 120 days, or a year. So I can hand it off to Jeff from here, but hopefully that's a helpful picture about how to plan a little bit for upcoming growth.
Great, thanks a lot. Sounds overwhelming. So I'm going to talk a little bit about managing inventory. The goal of inventory management is simple. It's to have enough inventory, but not too much. Simple concept, difficult to execute. For a company like Mountain Co. that's scaling quickly and trying to track their inventory on spreadsheets, it can become exceedingly complicated to know what you have on hand at any given time. You've got raw materials coming in, you've got raw materials consumed in manufacturing, you've got orders coming in, shipments against those orders. And so trying to track that in any sort of manual system, whether it's on spreadsheets or on paper or something like that, is exceedingly difficult. So the goal for any of this inventory management should be everybody in the company, sales, production, procurement, all those folks should be able to look at one system and have a single source of truth that everybody trusts. One mistake, one keystroke error in a spreadsheet, missing a zero, forgetting to fulfill an order, something like that can be catastrophic. When we go back to talking earlier about what David was talking about, if you can't fill an order for a large retailer because you don't have the inventory on hand, they're probably not going to come back. And so it's very important to have a handle on these things, and for the small investment and having a system in place that everybody can trust. Our customers very typically go from a world of spreadsheets and paper into our system, and it makes a world of difference for them. So at the end of the day, if you don't start with an accurate inventory and keep it accurate, you can do all the forecasting you want and inventory financing you want. If you don't have an accurate view of what your inventory is, then you're starting from at a disadvantage, and then moving forward, your inventory is going to be off and it becomes almost impossible to manage the business. So without further ado, I want to kind of head to questions here. And we do have one Actually, before we pop into that, some kind of process things that we've seen that have helped, especially heading into the types of planning and finance that we're talking about, boosting inventory audits, doing cycle counts so that you know what's on hand that corroborates what you have in a system, keeping some safety stock on hand. But again, inventory is expensive. You don't want to have too much safety stock on hand, so it's always a delicate balance. And then to make sure that the whole company is working together. So from sales that's out there selling specific products and marketing, doing promotions, to the procurement team, to the production team, making sure everybody's kind of working hand in hand and really having cross-functional meetings to make sure that the plan is cohesive throughout. And then we're going to hop into the Q&A session here. We do have one quick question, kind of going back to the financing piece, that how can somebody easily figure out what their options are and how much they cost? Is there some sort of screening process ahead of time where you can say, yeah, I have bank financing available to me, or this financing available, and this is the cost? So how do you kind of set up that matrix?
I would say, start with the options that I listed out and kind of go down the list. And it's definitely not, there is no easy way. You have to find providers for each type of financing and apply. And, one thing I would be careful of is hard inquiries on credit. Each one, makes you less bankable to the next solution. So just ask, there's a lot of a lot of these businesses are doing soft inquiries, including us. So, that's not visible to lenders. And another thing I would say, like, it's tempting to just put stuff on your credit card. Be very careful in doing that. Like, I would advise to go find a proper scalable financing solution rather than kind of putting the credit card band-aid on, because if, as you all know, if you exceed a certain percentage of your limit, it negatively impacts your credit, making you less bankable and making the access that you do have more expensive. So yeah, I would build a large list of providers and, go get offers from them. And also understand, I think more important than price is when the capital is available and how much of it is available and when it's paid back. Because if you're just looking at rates, you may find yourself in a position where you're paying back using money that you don't have yet, and you're like, oh, this was the cheapest solution, but now you actually don't have the cash, and you could totally flip your business upside down by going with that, as opposed to understanding that you have money needs at a certain date in time, and you're only going to have the money to pay it back maybe 6 months into the future. So you want to make sure that there is a gap from when you issue the payment until you start making the repayments, so that you're not, taking away from your marketing budget or whatever you actually needed to get in front of the customer to sell the inventory, stuff like that.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I think
kind of
David's
long-winded.
No, but I think David's point around timing is particularly important because, especially for companies that are growing and they're startups, cash, being cash strapped is like one of the biggest problems that they deal with on a daily basis. And, because the payment terms can be so different across these solutions, it really is key, right? Starting with even the manufacturer and working on a payment term with them, it could be that you still have to owe lump sums at, the beginning and then during the end of that negotiation period. But even that, sometimes these brands may not be lined up in terms of when they have to pay that versus when the brands actually, no, when the retailers actually pay them out. So then you might have to need then to add on a financing solution, but really it's contextual based on the amount of cash you have available and how much runway you have to be able to figure out what's optimal. And that's why I always work with brands to create different scenarios with some of these products to then help them understand how their cash is going to flow out over the foreseeable future and what they're paying for it, because it really is going to have to be an understanding of what's going on their ground floor to then know what is actually a proper fit and what product actually works for them.
Also, one more thing, it always takes longer than you think to get the money. Like, everybody, there so many customers that I've spoken to that are like, yeah, we're just checking you out because we're working on closing an equity deal. We're not going to need you. This equity deal is coming together. And then these equity deals take forever. I know, because we're VC funded, and we're going out for a raise, and it's a good thing to have runway, because sometimes it takes 6 months instead of 2 months or even longer. And so just be prepared for that and have a backup plan. And if you resort to an MCA, you may suffer the consequences, even though there's a time and place for it. But just be careful that you're kind of starting the evaluation and qualification process well in advance of when you think you'll need the money.
So once you identify some of these financing vehicles, are you able to lock them in for some period of time? What does that look like?
I mean, from our standpoint, a pre-approval is valid for 30 days. So, and I think that's kind of standard practice. Like, an offer is valid for 30 days, unless they're processing data in real time. That sort of changes the equation if they identify risk, good or bad. But yeah, I would say, lock it in so you have an idea, and then also work with your CFO or whoever is determining the financial health of your business to understand, if I'm about to spend a lot of money, is my business going to look riskier? Or if I'm about to take in payment from a buyer, is my business going to look less risky, which will potentially improve my rate or access to capital? Those are factors to consider that could change literally day to day.
Okay, we have one last question, which is, maybe the bane of a lot of companies' existence. How do you build a forecast when you can't really look at last year and you haven't gone through a big season yet, when you're really just starting to scale and your business is relatively unpredictable? How do you forecast, and how much risk should you be willing to take on when you're building that forecast? Because obviously there's a lot of cash at stake, and potentially even the company.
Yeah, happy to take that. And that is a particularly tricky question that does take a few dimensions to get right. So yeah, if you don't, a lot of brands, especially if they're during this explosive growth period, prior sales may not be a reliable indicator, sometimes because they completely sell out. And so it's not, just putting a growth rate on it it's not the same. So what I often try to look at first is really what they do, the information that is available, right? So kind of going back to the different forecasting methods, first one would probably be referenced down is really the bottoms up approach. Do they have a sense as to how many stores are going to be going in there? Do they have a sense of marketing spend? And even kind of how many customers they may be expecting to acquire with that spend. And you can probably look at it from those different dimensions to then kind of extrapolate down to what sales could probably be, just using some other indicator of what is going to happen. I think the biggest indicator from this end is just how much effort are you putting into what this coming season is going to look like, and how much do you expect to come out of that, right? So usually you can use the effort in to then create some kind of like metric to then determine kind of what the performance on the outflow is going to be. The other one that I like using pretty often, especially if you have the available data and if you're going to retail, is then the benchmarking performance. So let's say you're selling a good that is a pretty, your competitors are also selling as well. There's sometimes some resources such as Nielsen IQ, which can provide you a sense as to what movement per store per week is on your competitors' SKUs, and that should give you a pretty good sense on the benchmarking. If you were to launch, 3 SKUs are similar to your competitors and they're moving, X amount per week, then you can probably extrapolate out that your performance can, if you're launching out there, maybe likely to be conservative, a certain percentage of that, and then grow into either their level or higher. And when it comes to safety stock, I mean, that's definitely also another tricky area. I'd say really you want to understand want to factor in the idea that, for some goods, returns are actually reusable. And so, being able to have a good system, if you have a good system for tracking it down, then you can quickly turn it around and also sell it back into the market after, some corrections on the incoming stock. So, from that element, I always try to tell clients to look at a certain range within what their target is. So, it could be 80 to 120%. And then really, this is kind of where the qualitative discussions really start to happen a lot is your concern around under ordering related to a retailer that you just had that hasn't committed yet, but you have to order now? Or, are you being too over optimistic about, how the winter could be, and really you're really worried about how the weather might end up being because of the forecast? Those elements then become kind of more of an ongoing discussion. And honestly, at this point, it then becomes what level of risk the founder is really comfortable with And how can we at least kind of do a calculation to best fit the qualitative and quantitative aspects together.
Great, appreciate that. Well, I wanted to thank everybody for attending today. Certainly thank everybody here. A couple, again, housekeeping items. We'll be sending a follow-up email with a link for some collateral from the presentation, as well as the presentation itself. Certainly you can contact any of us here if you have any questions, or if you have ideas for future webinars. And with that, wanted to thank David and Kenny here, and appreciate everybody attending today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Kenny. Nice chatting with you guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.